system was where a medical professional comes in and says, you might need X amount of hours, it will be a point system. And this shows your needs on a scale from low needs all the way through to very high support needs. The needs you have given through the number of points, basically points make prizes. The plan will be considered by a professional panel called the Resource Allocation Screening Group. They will discuss and approve and support your final plan and your final budget. I can only speak from my experience. After filling out a nearly 30-page document, they gave me an estimated budget and it went in front of this panel and they went, no, they cut it. Lo and behold. So instead of getting 6 weeks respite per year, you can only get 4 weeks respite a year with the funding. But if we put them into an old folks home with psychogeriatrics at the age of 50, they can do it for 650. Now, in fairness, the facility used meets his needs. Social work have agreed that, you know, continuity of care, I keep hearing all this about. But they're costing £1,600 a week, I believe, for this company. And this company is called Glasgow City Council. That's who runs the care facility. And I'm just wondering why these prices, why Glasgow City Council is charging these high prices, you know, and if they're cutting people's money and you can't put your loved one into respite and these facilities don't get used or they get closed. This has only happened to me. And actually for his care package, do you know how much I cost each one of you spend? Each and every single one of you person in here is a council taxpayer. I cost you nothing because I do it myself. I wash his bum and make his tea. I don't ask for help and I don't want help. All I just want was the respite, 6 weeks of care, that's all I wanted. So I don't cost you anything. But when you are elected, you know, when you are elected, remember, you know, you're no Glasgow City Council. You guys are there to represent us. Because this is happening now. There's a lot of people out there. Pat's lucky because he's got me rent-a-mouth. But there's people out there, you know, that can't get into to fight their corner, you know. But my name's Donald McFadden, and by end of May, you will know who I am, I can assure you. Thank you very much.
Some people have already passed on across the city to their friends, their loved ones, to anybody that will listen to this whole personalisation scheme. While it may, in theory, have some attributes, it seems to be being used as another way of having more cutbacks. And I think really that is part of what, essentially what is being said here. And I'd like to find out what if elected, the candidates would presume to do about that situation, or maybe they think it's a great idea, who knows.
Okay. Well, first of all, let's establish the principle of personalised care as a good principle. That people should have, and their families should have, far more control over the kind of care that they get, because people are individuals, they're not just a label somewhere. But the person's absolutely right. Quite often what happens is that the council launch something and they call it things like best value or a new way of doing things, when in fact what they're doing is cutting the budget and trying to find another way of doing the same amount with less money. And that simply means putting it on to individuals and carers and their families. And I think what you've highlighted there is the role that carers play in our society, almost as unpaid labourers, or unpaid labour in our society. And it's also part, I think, of a growing sense of privatisation in our society. We think of privatisation as taking public industries into the private sector, but privatisation is something more. It's taking things that used to be delivered quite correctly by the state, by local government, and passing it into private hands. And I think it's important that council candidates stand up for local people, but also highlight these issues. There's not a magic wand here, because at the end of the day, you can only deliver services with budgets you've got. But at least I think council should be honest and say, the reason why we're delivering less is we have less money, and stop dressing it up as a new way of doing things, or a best value for money, when in fact it's simply cutbacks, basically, and they're hoping that people will swallow the cutbacks.
But what happens there, Chair, then is the carer who looks after the disabled person gets ill himself, and then you've got two people to look after. It's a false economy, and I know everything you said, you know, I totally agree with you. I know it's all down to funding, you know, it's all down to funding, but at the end of the day is that only so much can get put onto a carer before that carer breaks. I mean, the carer breaks, it's a false economy because you end up with two people ill. It's just, it's absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, I'm not politically naive to say, look, there's abundance of money. We know there's abundance of money. You know, there's no abundance of money. But, you know, to get the best deal out there is, you have to, you know, you can't even approach these people. This panel, I'm actually asking, you know, well, can I have a review? No. Well, can I attend this panel? No. Can I put a case across against this panel? No. Is a blank? No. Hey, that's it, end of story, bye-bye. But what I will say is disabled people can actually vote, and they'll be able to vote the mayor all.
Okay, I mean, I know it all is, but you're absolutely right. I think what you've highlighted is, I think amongst carers in this city, we're reaching crisis point, because more and more and more has been put onto carers, and quite often carers themselves has all sorts of needs. Just one very small example, my wife's a senior social worker, been a social worker for 25 years. When she first came into the profession, it was with a view of helping people. Now she finds herself as a budget manager, and her job every day is to say who's not, it's not basically to give services, but who's not getting services. And she says herself, you know, that is not why I came into social work. But I think what you've highlighted is, I think we have a crisis in this city amongst carers, whether it's elderly carers, people with their own caring needs, or actually children caring for, and basically taking on the burden that used to be legitimately carried out by local authorities and local government.
So, Chair, can we do a sweep of candidates to see what they're going to do with it? Because we all agree it's the problem.
Can I just say, Donald, I mean, I can concur with what you're saying there. We do put more and more onto carers. I was a carer at the age of 15 for my father who was in a wheelchair. And I actually says, no, wait a minute, enough's enough. I'm only young here. And when they asked me to start packing bed sores, I thought, no, that is a nursing profession. And that's, and I mean, what you're saying, I had a case there, and I'll not speak about who the person is or whatever, where they had an advocacy speaking, well, they were going through, but how long does it take you to dress? How long does it, whatever? The person couldn't communicate the voice. So they had ticked all the boxes, written the form up, and sent it away. And prior to it going away, they says to her to look it over. The girl read it and was going, no. And the advocacy says, that's the form completed. And that was put in. In that case, I'm fighting currently for her. And I would fight for any carer, because it's something that's very much close to my heart, having been there as a young child. Thanks.
Anybody else want to raise anything on this? Yes?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up, because I've also got friends here. I don't live in this area, I live in a neighbouring area, but it is a city-wide issue, and this is to do with the learning disabled specifically as well, who will be infected by, well, they are explicitly, there are cuts. I mean, it's actually, yes, there's Glasgow City Council implementing, but I managed to get hold of a social work inspector report, it's a scrutiny report on how Glasgow City Council is getting on with implementing personalisation in Glasgow. And it says in the report, quote, senior managers were confident that they had clearly communicated to all concerned that the process was driven by the imperative in the current austerity climate to making cost savings and a desire to deliver better outcomes. So it's quite explicit in this report what this is about, is cuts to the most vulnerable in our society. And I want to urge councillors, it's about fighting this corner. It's just so important. The learning disabled and people who are in care did not cause the banking crisis. They're not the people that caused it. And, you know, maybe we should be looking at how this can be properly funded in Glasgow City Council.
Thanks very much for that. And we need more passion like that. Maybe we need actually a bit of real information on it. Does somebody want to come in on that as well? Yes?
Yep, I do too. Please,
yep.
When you have time.
Oh, sorry.
as someone who's also been a carer, and my mum's a carer as well, I can totally empathise with you about the amount of work. And it's such a thankless job. People don't realise how much pressure that has on you as an individual and as a family, and I totally empathise with you and I think you're doing a great job. And for any carer, I've got friends as well that are carers as well. One of the Labour pledges to give a 25% increase to kinship carers. However, we've got to be realistic. Glasgow City Council has taken a big budget cut from the Scottish Government. So I do urge you to get in touch with your councillors and do keep raising this issue. Don't let it go in the background, because I do believe it's a very difficult task. People do it without any thanks. People do it day in, day out, and sometimes it's a 24-hour job. So I do empathise with you, and I will definitely fight for carers.
May I?
You first. That's right. Have a hand up first.
Okay, can you hear me? I'll save all the stuff for the mic.
Okay.
There's loads of us here being carers, me too, you know, and I think a lot probably you understand your own experience anyway, even if you don't understand everyone else's. This reminds me of the Atos healthcare thing. I was supporting my person going there for that. You know, it's a scoring point system as well, and it's driven by the agenda of getting people back to work. And this is driven by an agenda of, I think it's a 20% cut is the figure that I've heard about this one. I was at the disability Hustings recently. We have to change that. There is money in this country. If the Greens want land value tax, we're not taxing properly. There's great big landowners who, you know, who are not paying tax on what they own. We're just not getting the money we should be getting. So we also have our plan to raise money. We realise that it's essential to raise money. That's why we're saying have a renewable energy company in the city, owned by the city, publicly owned. None of this arm's length stuff. We refuse to join any of these, our councillors, and we think they're deplorable, hiving things off onto arm's length companies. As far as personalisation is concerned, as somebody said, it can be a good thing. It can mean somebody's not going to their bed at 8 o'clock when they don't want to go to bed. But I think we would all recognise personalisation is more expensive. Rolling things up into a package and saying this is what you get and this is what everybody that's assessed as having that condition gets is cheaper because it's bulk. Whereas saying you want to go out here and you want to go to your doctor this time, you're allocating individuals and it's dearer. It needs more money. The whole thing is about resources, and we have to address the resources issue. I don't think anybody wants to give people worse services. I'm sure nobody in the panel wants to give people worse services. In order to give people the services which they should get, we're going to have to get the resources. I've suggested a couple of ways that we can do that. And another thing is the whole scoring system, which is frightening. The person I'm supporting lost his intellectual capacity a bit, so that's not always recognised. So sometimes your leavings, you know, people scoring something, filling something in that they're not really able to fill in. And the fact that you say there's no appeal facility shocks me. I appealed at the Atos thing and was successful, you know, complete with doctors' reports and so on. If there's no appeal facility, there must be an appeal facility in everything. So if elected, I'd be campaigning for an appeals facility as well as trying to raise money and highlight the fact that this is driven by cuts, which is disgraceful.
Thanks. There's a few points I would like to make about this. Firstly, Soraya is right that Glasgow Council's budget has been cut because the Scottish Government's budget has been cut by something like £1.5 billion, and the decision was taken to protect the NHS, which meant that cuts were then put on to local authorities. So that is absolutely correct. However, the council's budget, I can't remember off the top of my head what the cut was, but it was certainly less than 5%. Social work budgets, the kind of personalisation budgets that you're talking about, have been cut by 20%. That's a choice, and it's a choice that's been made by the council, and it's the wrong choice. And it's certainly something that an SNP administration would change. I heard that one of my fellow candidates here saying that his wife was a social worker, so I hope I'm not going to start a fight here. But there needs to be a very major change of attitude in the social work department. A lot of you may know that Glasgow had community health and care partnerships set up, which kind of broke down, and I don't want to go over the whole history of that. But it's absolutely essential in these times where you have less money to go around that you get better working between the social work and the health side of things. A more integrated delivery of care is what can allow personalisation to work, because it should work. It's really important for people that they can have choice and control of their care, and that will also allow some of the burden to be lifted off the unpaid carers. And this would be a top priority for an SNP administration, because we all see it, the councillors see it, people like me who work for an MSP, you get case after case after case of people who are just having their care cut to quite a preposterous degree where it's just not acceptable. And don't let anybody kid you on, there are choices being made about this. They are the wrong choices, and people need to keep pushing to get a review of the whole service. In fact, I think it was Danny Alderslow, the councillor here, who took that to the last executive committee meeting of the council, and were supported by, I think, by all of the opposition parties, because quite frankly what's going on is quite scandalous, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Nice to see a bit of cross-party cooperation there between the Greens and SNP, and giving each other credit for that. I never thought to see the day. But of course, when we first got the Scottish Parliament, we were told there was going to be a new kind of politics, but we're still waiting. So, but maybe that's a new start here tonight. Who knows? I see we've got a hand. 3 hands, 4 hands all got up at the one time. I'm just going to stick my big mouth into the debate just to mention one thing, and that is that there's a lot of evidence which is seldom mentioned, which really shows to the effect there's no need for any of these cuts, because while Britain does have a debt, Britain has always had a debt in recorded history almost, it is not serious in the way that the government claims it's serious. Most of the bonds and other kinds of forms of debt that they have are due to be paid over a period of 14 years. Each individual one, in most cases, are due to be paid over a period of 14 years. So I just wonder why the politicians, any of them that know these facts, why they do not put up some kind of resistance against this and just accept it. We're going to have this austerity. But there you go, that's life, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to take a young man there called Aliu, who's sitting in front of Gavin. Then I'll take Gavin, then I'll take you, and then I'll take you. Is that okay? That sounds fair enough. You've got a nice loud voice. Could you please use it? Thank you.
Okay. Can I say Glasgow will be hosting the 2014 Games here in Glasgow. And of course there has been a lot of preparation to these Games. But what people in this town don't know, what people in this country don't know about is there will be Commonwealth countries that are coming for these Games. And Commonwealth as an organization is one of the best abusers of human rights that are coming for these Games. If you look at the survey in this town, people who are seeking sanctuary in Glasgow comes from Commonwealth countries. And having been here for quite some time, I've had people speaking to me about where I come from. Now I come from the Gambia. Gambia is part of the Commonwealth. And this is a country where human rights, civil liberty, political freedom are being assaulted on a daily basis. Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, many other countries. I just want to get a commitment from all of you that whether you will join the campaign as it draws closer to campaign against those oppressive government that are of course going to participate in these Commonwealth Games and raise awareness about what is happening in those countries. Secondly, I'm sure you'll all be aware that there is a scandal going on at the moment where up to 140 people will soon become homeless, and these are asylum seekers. Now the story about it is YMCA, or the Y people that used to house asylum seekers, refused asylum seekers. Now the contract has now been shifted to SACO, which is a multinational company. Now you all feel that probably this will be a very easy transition from the Y people to SACO, but it's a different thing completely. If your asylum is refused and you're in the Y people accommodation, you're being told to leave those accommodations. And those people are now going to be living in our streets. In Glasgow, Glasgow is one of the cities that we're all proud of, giving us that sanctuary. But here we have a situation where people are being made destitute. And I just want to know what, if elected, what would be your stand on some of these things? Because obviously it's not right that we have people in a situation like this. So these two issues, I'll be very grateful if I can get people's commitment on these two issues.
So that's the question about human rights and Commonwealth countries, given the games are coming up, and the question of evictions and destitution.
Okay. Some people might think, well, this is a local community council and this is about local government elections. What's that got to do with the Commonwealth, or what's that got to do with human rights abuses in various parts of the country? I think these things are immensely important. I don't think you can just draw distinctions between them. I know what it's like to be a refugee. I was a refugee once. I once lived in Sudan, lived there for a number of years, had a house there, had a job there, lived in Darfur, and was expelled from the country overnight, put on a plane and dumped back in Glasgow with literally the clothes that I stood on. With literally no other result other than the fact that I originally came from Glasgow. So that type of thing can happen to anybody. And you're quite right, many of the Commonwealth countries that will be appearing at the Commonwealth Games, some of them have an appalling track record in human rights. And we should be clear to highlight this issue. We should also be clear that when it comes to the celebrations around the game, we shouldn't shy away from some of these issues. On the particular issue about Glasgow City Councils and the way that they're dealing with asylum seekers, etc., I think there's an awful lot passing here, and the council quite often washing their hands of what's going on. At a very basic level, asylum seekers shouldn't be evicted from houses which would lie empty anyway. This is a matter of principle. You shouldn't evict them. You should find another way of doing it. And quite often the council is using the kind of emotional thing around asylum seekers as a kind of bargaining counter with other agencies. We should not have, in a city that has 19,000 empty properties, why are asylum seekers wandering the streets? We claim to be a civilised society. Well, that is not evidence of a civilised society. It's evidence of abuse. And I don't think as a society, as a city, we should put up with that.
Oh, sorry, wasn't
Thanks. Can everybody hear me? Well, we'll do without it. Thanks. Obviously, when you talk about the Commonwealth Games, Glasgow will be the centre of attraction in 2014. I'm hoping that we will use that as a platform to be able to talk to the people of these regimes, and hopefully some of them will come up here, some of the heads of states will be coming here, and they'll be able to see what's happening in Glasgow, what's happening in the UK. We live in a democracy, how everything is occurring here without having to oppress people, right? We have our cuts, we have our limitations, but we don't have to oppress people to do that. And I'm hoping that it will be done, and that Glasgow will use that opportunity. The actual administration will use that to pass the message on to these people that come along and say, look, you need to change. The world has become too small now. It's no longer that things are happening in the part of the world and nobody finds out. Now within minutes or seconds, you just go onto the internet and everything's available. So hopefully, and I will certainly, if re-elected, use that opportunity to try and talk to as many people that come along and say to them that, look, we need to change, we need to make sure people have a voice, let them speak. They're your own people, I just can't understand why any country would oppress its own people. You know, everybody has a view. I might not like the view of half of the panel here, but that doesn't mean I have to oppress them and have to go and say, right, keep quiet or I'll hit you or whatever, you know, they're doing. So that's wrong. As far as the white people one goes, it is atrocious. It should have never been allowed to happen. And as it's been pointed out, there's too much of this buck, pass the buck to the next person. It wasn't me, it was her, it wasn't her, it was him. So everybody's going around. It's the old story of nobody did it, everybody knew about it, you know, and it just goes around. It has to change. Hopefully there will be an administration change in Glasgow on May the 3rd, which is what we're hoping for, and you will see that one of the first things we want to do is start looking at every single department. Every single department. There has been too much complacency that's been going on in the city. Right? There are many things that can be changed, and if I can go back to the last point, I'm sorry, I have a real task of, I'm not a big fan of social work. I'm far from there. I think they, in turn, need to be looked at. The whole thing has to be revised. There's no longer that people are sitting behind in closed rooms and just making decisions. In the same way, when it comes to white people, people who have come from countries where they were destitute, they've come here seeking our help, and for them to be there, and then we've given them shelter, and then for us to turn around and say, right, no, it's no longer possible, we'll throw you out onto the street, shows that, well, it would be a shame on Glasgow if this kind of thing is allowed to happen. So hopefully with a change in administration, we will be fighting every step of the way to try and make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen and is stopped in its track.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. It's part of the commodification of people, this whole thing, that we parcel them out into contracts. It's wrong. I was helping give out stuff at Christmas to asylum seekers who were destitute at that point. We were giving out packs and stuff to people who just didn't have anything, you know, with the programme for the PAC people, Robina Qureshi, I don't know if you're aware of them. But I just felt ashamed and horrified that these people were out on the streets. I really did. You know, I was just appalled at the whole idea. And this is the year when our Homelessness Act does come into force, where if you're unintentionally homeless, you must be housed. So, you know, let's house people and keep them housed. It's disgraceful to fling them out onto the streets. It's just utterly disgraceful. And the whole idea of selling things off and parcelling it up in contracts, that's just wrong. You know, a home is not a commodity, it's a need. And you don't make a commodity of a need. So I just utterly disagree with all of that. As far as the Commonwealth Games is concerned, I worked in the East End of Glasgow. I was a school teacher there, where I spent the last 20 years of my working life. The kids there have got no idea about anything that's, you know, going on really. I shouldn't say that so largely, you know, but they're just kind of thinking Commonwealth Games, that's good for our area, good for Dalmarnock, because that's what they're being sold all the time, that's what they're being told all the time about it. We need to educate, we need to say, look, there's all sorts of problems, and that this is a wonderful occasion to welcome visitors, but it's also a wonderful occasion to make some protests, to publicise things. So I hope that there's going to be an opportunity to permit that, because one individual can make a difference. I can remember years ago, one individual in the supermarket who refused to deal with the South African oranges. She was a shop worker in Ireland, actually. I don't know if any of the rest of you remember that. Maybe I'm older than all the rest of you, but she was a shop worker in a supermarket, and she just refused to put these South African oranges through her till. Well, what a big, I mean, I think she did lose her job. What a big risk to take, you know? But she made a stand, and she did make a difference. And we could make a difference. As a city, we can publicise this, and we can make a difference, I think. So, thank you for raising it.
Yes, thank you. Speaking as a sports writer, I mean, I welcome the Commonwealth Games coming to Glasgow, but what I have concerns about is and we were talking earlier about funding and funding for carers and so forth. The amount of money that's being spent in the East End of Glasgow, I think I've concerns about that. There's millions and millions of pounds being poured into East End of Glasgow, and other areas, such as here in Govanhill, are suffering because of it. I think there should be a full investigation into just how much money has been spent over the years in the East End of Glasgow. I quite agree that we should take the opportunity for our friends, you know, talking about Gambia, Zimbabwe. We should. These countries will be here. The athletes will be here for the Commonwealth Games because they're members of the Commonwealth Games Federation, and United Kingdom doesn't actually have a choice of whether they come or not. They will be here, but by all means, you know, feel free to protest, feel free to speak to people about this and let them know that you know that the world condemns some of the human rights abuses going on. Question was raised about asylum seekers and 19,000 empty properties in Glasgow. I mean, that's appalling. What I would say to that is, I mean, the Labour Party have been running Glasgow for 30 years now as a one-party state. Why is there 19,000 empty houses in the city?
Okay. Anne-Marie, you want to speak about this?
Yeah, I'll use that.
Right.
I mean, I hear what you're saying there about the human rights and whatnot, and I believe we all have rights, and I think the Commonwealth Games coming to Glasgow is a good platform to raise the lack of rights for humans in other countries, and that's what we should be doing. Whether I'm re-elected or it's my colleagues sitting here at the top table, I think we all have a responsibility to take that forward to Glasgow City Council when we've got the heads of state there and hammer home and tell them this isn't acceptable, the way that they treat their own people. In relation to people homeless, Glasgow has a responsibility, whether monetary, we have a responsibility to field asylum seekers or not, but we do have that humanitarian responsibility, and I certainly, if I'm re-elected, I would be taking those points forward in behalf of the people of Glasgow.
Has everybody had to say on that? Thank you. Yes.
I'm really glad you raised that point. I think irrespective of someone's race, religion, where they originate from, everybody has basic human rights will come under the Human Rights Charter. What I do urge you is to continue to lobby your MP, MSP and your councillor to raise awareness, keep raising the awareness as well. And I also I'll back you in terms of raising the awareness as well. In terms of asylum seekers, I'll stand up for anyone who has their human rights abused and so forth. Again, in my college environment, constantly coming across people that are asylum seekers that have issues, maybe for whatever reason in second language, first language, or cuts, due to the cuts, that courses have been cut. They don't have options to do certain courses and so forth as well, so I will keep fighting for these rights.
Thank you. I'd just like to say at this point that we have approximately 20 minutes time left. The original plan was to have some questions and answers and then allow each of the candidates to have a couple of minutes to say something at the end. But from a slow start, a hesitant start, it's now the case that there's a sea of hands out here, and unless the candidates object, I'd quite like for those people with their hands up, every one of them if possible, to have a chance. So at the risk of favouritism, I'm going to let Gavin come back in again, and then go for you, and you, and there was one over here, and one over here, in that order. Okay, thanks. The floor's yours, Gavin.
Maybe just have a quick fire across the candidates. We're dealing with a situation, we maybe don't need to have the reduced income, we could maybe increase taxation, all those kinds of things. But those things are the longer term. We're at where we are, we've got a reduced budget in the city. I would like to see how the candidates would reprioritise those cuts. I mean, for example, is it essential that Glasgow Safety Services has a yacht, which looks rather nice, but I'm not really into sailing. Where would that money go? What would you guys cut? Where would you take the money away from? Where would you put it? Just quickly, just along the strip. Somebody should start.
Right,
Yeah,
sorry, yes, on you go, carry on.
I go, Anthony.
Right, okay.
Go.
I'll speak. Gavin, thanks for raising the fact that Glasgow Community Safety Services have a yacht. I'll certainly be raising that in the morning. I would say they don't need a yacht for anything. I can't see or think for loving their money why they would have such an expensive item. What do they do with it?
Is it a safe yacht?
I don't know. They're not hiding it, that's why we don't see them in the streets. But anyway,
I've only seen a picture of it.
right, okay. But I mean, if that was the case, the money for that yacht I would take and I would put into carers. I would put into the
Youth services?
mental health issues. You know, because I mean, I do worry about personalisation. People that's come from an addictions background, and they're being says, well, here, let's sit down, let's talk about what your needs are, and then they get that money to actually take it physically and say, I want to buy your service. I worry about that because I know that if I'm an alcoholic and I have additional money, I know where I'm going. I'm going down to the G101 or wherever, and I'm going to buy a bottle because it's my money. And I really, I mean, that is a worry, but I mean, if you're telling me Glasgow Community Safety Services have something like that, that should have been the first thing to go as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, just as an update on that, I also had to go and, not quite filch, but scrounge paint for Glasgow Safety Services to use on railings around the bandstand because they didn't have the money to pay for it. Did it go into the yacht, you know? I don't mind scrounging paint off.
Yeah.
LES gave it to me. But
I think in particular, I mean, my colleague was talking there about, you know, different departments need to look at. I think they really need to look at Glasgow Community Safety Services because they're getting vast amounts of money and little return for it.
Yes, sorry, you first and then Bill.
Me?
All right, okay, sorry. On you go.
Safety services yacht, is this, where is this, I mean, is this where you take, is this part of the resources or is this something that's out with, is this a kind of a expense or?
no, I think it's part of, I mean, they probably see it as part of rehabilitation and reintegrating offenders into the community. I mean,
Right, so it's about putting back into,
So can I just raise a point that I think it's actually used for youth work. It's for inner city kids, taking them trips to Arden, for sailing and
well, it's just trying to kind of empower youth, integrate the youth. So, I mean, when you've raised that, that sounds almost like somebody's got a yacht and they're away on a luxury trip and so forth, but I'm glad that you pointed that out then. In terms of I'm glad that came out. In terms of prioritisation, I believe that apart from carers, and obviously that's a priority as well, education.
I mean, even if youth work is a yacht a priority for the city that have asylum seekers living on the streets and carers who are having their health ruined because they don't have the money to support them.
I would certainly like to know which young people are actually using this, because I've never heard a lot of money, any young people from Govanhill, Warbles, Tory Glen accessing a yacht, and it would be interesting to see who is actually accessing it for.
Right, I'm sorry, I'll have to cut it short a wee bit there. Something got a very quick point, Mary.
In order to answer your question, we need to know what the money is spent on, and frankly we don't. In the SNP's manifesto, we redirected less than 1% of the council's current budget. The council has a very big budget. So one of the things we would do is completely review every department and publish that information, because I think people really need to be able to see where money is spent, how it's spent, where it could be spent better, and then we need to have a very open debate about that. This is not the kind of decision which should be taken, you know, by committees behind closed doors.
Okay,
it needs to be taken very publicly.
Yeah. Thanks very much. And the next question. Sorry, Bill, you were lined up for it.
We still want to get diverted about the yacht. I didn't know about this yacht. The yacht was actually donated to the City Council. And there's a trust behind it that puts money into it from a charity. So the council's contribution to it is actually quite small, and it is used for youth services, without getting diverted. In terms of budget cuts, I actually borrow on what the chairperson said, that the financial crisis hitting this city and hitting other cities throughout Britain is not the fault of this city, and it's not the fault of the people of this city and other cities. We are a rich society. There are plenty of resources in society to fund all these things. If we stop, for example, funding massive tax handouts to the rich, for example. Our standpoint would be to set a defiance budget, which basically is no cuts, and then fight to get the resources necessary, rather than simply capitulating to the budgets that have been set. Because all you end up doing is making the cuts in personal services, putting asylum seekers on the streets, making the cuts to social work and all the other budgets of the police, and that's all end up doing. And the Socialist Party won't be part of that. We are not there as a cutting party. We'd actually rather people fought for their communities, fought for the resources, and fought whoever, and fight for those positions. We might not win, but it's better to go down fighting than simply be a council that just goes and cuts services on behalf of the government.
The question was asked exactly, how would we become more efficient? Well, I think one of the things that people might not realise, in 2010, Glasgow City Council actually underspent their budget. There was a surplus, wasn't spent, and I have that from the then City Treasurer, Bailey James McNally, whom I know well. I would look for better, more efficient management. I would also look at staffing levels in the city chambers. I am gravely concerned, because I'm in the city chambers a fair bit, probably on average once a month. This may be unfair in many members of staff in the city chambers. There's an awful lot of them are Labour Party activists, and I've already said the Labour Party has been running the council for 30 years. I'd like to know, is that nepotism? Or maybe that's unfair, maybe they're there on merit, but there is a very high proportion of staff in the city chambers and Labour Party activists. I'd look at the use of council vehicles. We've mentioned, I won't go into the yacht. I'd review every department, as already been said. I'd also have a look at the Common Good Fund. There's a huge amount of money in the Common Good Fund, which goes back over many, many decades. That may well, is it really necessary to have such a high level in the Common Good Fund, which is used for things like entertaining and for promoting the city of Glasgow? A lot of that's important, but perhaps some of that can be taken out of the Common Good Fund and spent for better use.
Can I come in very rapidly?
Very rapidly, please.
I echo what's just been said. Cutting ceremonial, cutting luxury. Also, I quote from the Bird's Eye blog, which has just come out, that Glasgow had the lowest rate of council tax collection in Scotland in 2010 to 11, collected just over 92% of the council due to its area. I quote, even increasing the rate of collection by 1 or 2% would provide substantial additional revenue for expenditure and perhaps stave off some cuts in services. As to where it should go, well, I'll just make one suggestion which has come up very, very forcefully in this meeting. It should go, for instance, to carers, because the point has been made, it's a false economy not to support carers, because there's going to be a huge and dreadful expenditure in the long run.
Thank you.
Are you going across, or are you just going to stop?
Unless you're really desperate, then you can say it really quickly.
Well, they did ask if everyone do you agree.
Right, okay.
I wouldn't be making a swift decision on anything. When our councillors went into the council, they discovered there was no register of the common good stuff, which is there's loads of land and property. There was no maintenance schedule for it. The council didn't know where their energy were going. It was one of our councillors who chaired the energy committee and worked out where they got smart meters in and worked out where the energy was leaching out. I'm not going to give a quick populist answer about this is what I would prioritise. This takes careful consideration and working out where the money is, and only then do we see where we would need, if ever, to make any cuts. We have, as you know, a longer term plan, which I've explained, to make money, and that's fundamental. We have to be able to get money to go from the basis that we supply the services the citizens need.
Next.
Just quickly, there's been talk about privatisation, and I saw the Green candidate's T-shirt that she showed mentioned the handing over of council land to social enterprise, right? I mean, I think there are questions about transparency and accountability, as well as ownership around handing over public open space to non-public sector groups. So what are the candidates' ideas for the democratic management of public open space?
Right, and I just want 1 minute from each person on this, because we've not got very many minutes left. And there's at least 3 other people hoping to get a question in.
Well, simply that it remains that you do have accountability, because there's you draw up a contract and you still have you've still got the contact and who they report to as to what they're doing with this land. For instance, we got one for a GAP site that's not going to be developed for a few years, and so that local people can use the GAP site with the agreement of the developer and grow food or have a garden on it for a while. It then reverts back to who it was originally owned by. So as long as you negotiate properly and there's proper trust on both sides, we can make that one work.
And the profit motive should be kept out. The Go Ape, for instance, in Pollock Park, the business in Botanic Gardens, when they tried to turn it into a nightclub. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I quite agree. There's too many areas of Glasgow City Council have been hived off. Quangos are running different, different areas, and too many executives and too many councillors running the city are being paid to run these quangos. That's wrong.
In relation to the public spaces, there's already one in Govanhill where we did work with a developer who's obviously wants to develop his land, but because of the downturn, it was turned into a garden area for the community access, and there is trust on both sides where he had given the land for a set period of time, and we are coming to the end of that. But there is, at the moment, it is now kind of turned into a bit of a workspace because we're doing the backcourt improvements on that site. But I mean, I think that if there's any pieces of land which can be used for community, and if they're in council ownership, or even if they're in private ownership, then we should be negotiating with the private owners to see if we could do it and tidy these bits of land up, because there's nothing worse than you're going by and you see a bit of ground and it's absolutely just a mess, whereas people could actually get use out of it through growing veg or whatever.
Very briefly, there's two issues there. You mentioned privatisation. I think we should oppose all privatisation. I think the track record of privatisation in this city and across Britain has been a disaster by just about every definition of the term disaster you can find. Privatisation leaves all of us worse off and a few rich people richer. In terms of developing social enterprise, I think that's generally to be welcomed. But you're right about accountability, because when you bring in partnerships with private companies, you mentioned building up a position of trust. My experience is don't trust them. Don't trust them. Make sure that you tie everything down in agreements. You make sure that they carry out their obligations, because private companies, by and large, are really in it for private profit, not for local good. So if you're going to involve private companies, make sure you nail them down
I would say,
physically.
I would say accountability and transparency. Also do analysis of the community and what its needs are. What would be good for the long term, not a kind of short term thing, well, let's just make a use for it. Look at the long term in terms of will it be good for jobs, will it be good for the economy, sustainability and so forth, and green as well. So look at the needs of the community and take it from there.
I think anything owned by the council should stay with the council. When we came into the power, or we came into opposition, we created all these alios. Everybody and their cat and dog wanted to be on these alios as from the council side of it, because they were getting paid. One of the things the SNP did was said, that's fine, you can stay on them, but you shouldn't get paid anymore. And what that resulted in was there was directive from the Scottish Government saying, fine, you can be the chairperson, you can be a director of the ALU, but you're not getting paid an extra £6,000–7,000. Surprise, surprise, there were so many councillors who really wanted to then get off these ALU boards, but couldn't, because the public would have lynched them for saying, right, you're very happy to go on to them and you're getting paid, and now you want to get off it. Anything that's owned by the council should stay with the council. Public land, if there is opportunities that we can utilise it for a while, yes, we should try and utilise it as much as possibility. There has to be a lot more accountability, openness, and social enterprise is great, work with them, but one thing which I'm really against is I want to see things that are there and money that's being spent should be used youth should be at front end and used by the people, not to create jobs for people in the background who are just passing money from one to another for jobs, and at the front end people aren't getting any services delivered to them. I don't think services and money should be there.
Okay, Nick Dury, Power and Community. Just briefly, we don't have much time. On the 1st of April, 63 community leaders came together basically to come up with the Glasgow Won't Be Fooled community agenda for the election, drawing together a number of different points: housing justice, sustainability, jobs and accountability. And I won't go into the specifics, but I was wondering if each of you